Good evening to everyone. I am Sumit. I am the founder for Headsup Corporation, and I'm super excited to host the second season of our Headsup webinar series. Uh, the topic for today is very pertinent to the changing times we are working in, the dynamism which is there in the entire ecosystem. The topic goes by the name Leadership Crafting Self Concepts for Transformation, and we could not have thought for a better individual to really give the insights and make this evening a great evening itself. Uh, Thank you, Professor Mulla, for giving your time and agreeing to come on the platform. It was great to have you last time around, almost 2 years now, when we did the session on leadership in turbulent times. Uh, Today, again, we are going to focus, going to deep dive into a lot of buzzwords, which includes the Great Resignation. We would be talking about the evolving nature of leaders and followers relationship. We would be also talking about the impact of the leader follower relationship, which is happening today. And the entire flow of this virtual event is that we are just going to start with the presentation, which is going to be for around 30 minutes. Now, I'm sure there would be a lot of questions which all the participants will have. My suggestion is that you can start leaving the questions in the comments, and then in the meantime, we would kind of curate those questions and have those answered as much as we can in the next 1 hour or so. We'll also try, if the time permits, to get a couple of folks on the platform and ask the questions. But again, that is not guaranteed. And I really expect this session to be very insightful because uh, I am always a big fan of Sir, and it's always great to have you. So, Sir, I think it's over to you. We can start by sharing the screen and we can start with the session.
Yes, thank
Thank
you very much, Sumit, for this welcome and this opportunity. It's always a pleasure to be here with you, and I guess there would be several of our alums in the group.
right.
Very good evening to everybody here. I hope that you and your loved ones are healthy and happy. Now, the last few months have been quite interesting. We've been reading several reports of disruptions, remote working in the new normal, people preferring to work from home. The pandemic has changed the way we look at work. Most of us in these last 2 years have reviewed our life and our careers. More than two-thirds of people have questioned whether they were in the right job, and more than half of us have really pondered whether our job is fulfilling any purpose or whether or not we should focus on other priorities of our life. While responding to several of these challenges, there are a couple of questions, but there have also been a few answers. The most interesting amongst them is a McKinsey quarterly article in September 8, 2021. If you look at this particular table over here, in the x-axis, they map out the responses of the employers, and in the y-axis, they map out the responses of the employees. And both the employers and the employees were asked a similar question. The employers were asked the question, why do you think people are leaving? And if you look at the kind of responses they have given, most of them are focusing on transactional aspects of life, like inadequate compensation, looking for a better job, poor health, work-life balance, etc. That is this particular column over here in the right-hand side. But the same question was asked to the employees, that what makes you quit an organization? Most of the employees gave answers such as, I'm not valued by the organization, I'm not valued by the manager, I don't have a sense of belonging at the workplace, I don't trust my teammates, and so on. So what we see here is some kind of a disconnect between what it is that is troubling the employees and what it is that the employers think is the issue. And today we will be trying to see what is the role of leadership in addressing some of these issues. So in today's webinar, we will be trying to cover three topics. The first is we will try to understand what is leadership, because there are several misconceptions about this particular topic. The second is we'll try to look at how do leaders motivate followers to work for the good of the group. How do they make the followers keep the interests of the group over and above their own personal interest? Whenever we look at something like this, talking about followers keeping the good of the group over their own personal interests, we've often seen that when individuals feel very strongly about the group, it can be a double-edged sword. For example, if you look at the January 6th last year, where a mob of around 2,000 supporters of Donald Trump attacked the Capitol building in Washington, threatening to hang the vice president. The question is, how can leaders motivate their team and at the same time prevent the negative outcomes of a strong group cohesion and loyalty? So let us start off with the first question. When we talk about the term leadership in the English language, leadership is meant to mean several things. The simplest and most straightforward definition of leadership is occupying a position of authority over other human beings. But that's not really what we look for in an organization. We are not simply looking at people occupying a position of authority. So, this definition does not really satisfy us when it comes to looking at the problems that we face today. Another way in which people talk about leadership is about achieving preeminence in a particular skill or discipline. Someone's very good in a particular skill, someone's very good at their work. Today, again, this is not something that is relevant for us. While this may help, this is not something that is really going to address the issues that we are looking at. The third way in which we look at leadership is about getting people to do things. This perhaps would resonate more with us that yes, when people are in a leadership position, their role is about getting others to do things. But we could get others to do things in a variety of ways. We could bulldoze people into do things. We could bully people into do things. And that does not really resonate with our understanding of leadership. So we reject this definition also. Some of the most popular authors would talk about leadership as getting people to want to do the things. If you can somehow persuade people that they want to do the things themselves, where you bring in their willingness, then perhaps that is leadership. But this again, while this may satisfy several people, I would like to take this with a pinch of salt. The question is, what is it that you're getting them to want to do? Is it that they can ignore any ethical or moral considerations? For example, the people who stormed the Capitol, they wanted to do it. But is that what leadership is about? Is leadership about getting people to want to do things which are going to make them worse off? Or can we do better than that? So I propose to you that we look at leadership as getting people to want to do things that they really need to do. This word want and need has an interesting distinction. When we talk about what they need to do, there is a certain oughtness to it. That means what they ought to do. We bring in a little bit of a moral character over here. And the difference between the earlier definition of getting people to simply want to do things and getting people to want to do the things that they need to do brings in that moral aspect of leadership, which is essential and central to leadership. Unfortunately, when we try to look for leadership, most of us focus on leaders rather than leadership. If you were to simply do a Google search of the phrase leadership secrets of, you will find more than 5 billion hits on that particular page. So when we look at all these great individuals and we try to focus on what is it that we consider the leadership secrets, you will find there is a huge incongruence. There will be someone for whom the leadership secret would be forgiveness. There will be someone else for whom leadership secret would be to dominate their enemies, and so on. So we do not find any consistency when we look at these great individuals and try to dig into their leadership secrets. Several times you will find that two authors describing the same human being may discover different secrets, so-called for leadership. So this is not the place to look for. The problem here is that most leadership ideas are trying to look for static explanations for a dynamic phenomenon. What we mean by this is if we look at even some great people like Gandhi, Martin Luther King, and Nelson Mandela, even they were not consistent in terms of their impact over others over a period of time. What I mean by that is while Gandhi was alive, even though he led the entire large part of the Indian population to freedom, not everybody followed him. And there's no saying what would happen to him if he would have continued to live longer. Look at Winston Churchill. He was the great celebrated leader of World War II of Britain. But after the World War, he found it difficult to remain in power. So, if we really want to understand leadership, we must look simultaneously at three different components. The first is we must, of course, look at the leader. This is the conventional approach where we focus on the leader's abilities, values, personality, and behavior. This, of course, matters. But in addition to this, we need to look at the follower. We need to recognize that not all individuals who are exposed to the leader would get inspired or affected by the leader. Some followers, some group members will become followers, while others will remain by the side. Some may even become active opponents. So, this is an aspect of leadership we need to recognize. And the third thing we need to look at is the context. When context changes, the leadership relationship may change. And when we look at the intersection of these three, that is where leadership perhaps we would be able to understand. So we need to relook at leadership not as a characteristic of a person or an individual, but as a process of social change in which an individual influences others to willingly work for a joint purpose, which transforms the individuals and the group for the better. Notice here the emphasis on the word process, on the word change, and for the better. So, what we are looking at over here is a dynamic process involving three components: the leader, the follower, and the context, and an understanding that leadership changes the individuals and the group for the better. Now, over the last 40 years or so, leadership research has been going on, and several aspects of leadership are known today. For example, we know that essentially there are four kinds of behaviors which enable the formation of the leadership relationship. First is an individual being a great role model. Second is engaging group in the pursuit of a larger purpose. Third is stimulating the group to think out of the box. And finally, helping group members to realize their full potential through coaching, mentoring, and other activities. We also know that leadership can have real outcomes in terms of positive business outcomes like better sales, production, quality, safety, profits, etc. Leadership can enhance individual and group morale substantially, and leadership can also change people's values for the better. But what still remains not understood when we look at the world of leadership research is the whole black box of follower motivation. This still remains not clearly understood by leadership scholars. There are several people who have tried to explore this and understand it. Now, if we look at some of the conventional theories of motivation, like, for example, we have Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we have McClelland's theory of needs, Adams' equity theory, Vroom's expectancy theory, Locke and Latham's goal setting theory, and Hackman and Oldham, and Ryan and Dacey, and so on. We find that there are several areas where these theories fall short when it comes to explaining the motivational impact of inspirational leaders. So, for one thing, the traditional theories focus exclusively on rationality and personal utility maximization of individuals. They believe that people are always rational and all they do is to try to maximize their personal utility. But the reality of human beings, as we all know, is that we are not just rational maximizers, but we are also self expressive. Now, what that means is that we don't do things only because we are going to get something in return. We may do something because of an expression of who we are. For example, if you think of yourself as a sincere person, you're likely to be striving to be sincere in several situations, no matter what the payoff. If you think of yourself as a carefree person, then that's the way you're going to behave. Now, being sincere or being carefree are your personal identities. So, according to this way of looking at human motivation, people are not only seeking pleasure, which is extrinsic or intrinsic, people are also motivated to maintain and enhance their self esteem, which makes them feel that they are competent, enhance their self worth, which makes them feel that they are moral human beings, and enhance their self consistency. That means they want to remain consistent with what they were yesterday. They want to continue in their particular trajectory that they were yesterday. So, this particular theory of self concept based motivation relies on self concepts which are made up of hierarchically arranged social identities, and it is these social identities that motivate action. For example, let us try to understand what we mean by these social identities. Suppose you are celebrating Independence Day with some of your friends and colleagues. It is likely that at that time your identity as an Indian citizen will be salient. It will be uppermost in your mind. This same Indian identity may be activated when the country is in danger or attacked for war. And at such a time, if someone were to ask you for a donation for well-being of the Indian people, chances are you would be more likely to give the donation. So the self concepts, when activated, can really trigger individual actions. So, this whole world of social identities suggests that when we look at an individual as made up of these different social identities, we recognize that these are meaningful definitions of oneself, which are dependent on one's membership in groups. They not only give us a sense of who we are, but they also give us a window in which to look at the world. They tell us how to make sense of events. Who we are helps us to make sense of what is happening around us and cope with several events happening in our midst. Let me give you some practical example of how social identities can impact us at work. Most of us have been part of a training setup where you have these round tables arranged in a room and individuals are made to sit randomly in these small groups. These groups are usually made just randomly, but even these random groups give people a sense of identity and people feel a sense of solidarity with their team members. If the trainer further reinforces this identity of the group by asking them to give it a group name or some other activity which the group members do amongst themselves, chances are that this group of individuals at one table will be more closely bonded together as compared to other groups of individuals. This means even randomly creating a group which is otherwise meaningless gives you a sense of identity, and that affects your behaviors in the future. Social identities can also be used to negatively manipulate people. In 1986, Roger Boisjoli was an engineer in the Challenger space shuttle program. He was working for a contractor who was supplier for NASA. Due to the low temperatures at that time, he felt that the O-rings would not have the required elasticity to sustain at the time of the launch of the Challenger space shuttle. He was concerned about this and he raised this issue to his managers. When he told his managers about this, they were not happy because so much had been planned for the space shuttle launch and they did not want to postpone it. Finally, they were so exasperated with him that they told him, "You take off your engineering hat and put on your management hat." What they tried to do was to activate his identity as a manager, an administrator, and put aside his engineering or science identity. When he did that, he agreed to the launch because of so much preparation. And finally, it was a disaster. Seven of the astronauts died in that particular space shuttle launch because of the O-ring failure. Another example is the studies of Premila de Cruz and Ernesto Narona in the Indian call centers. When they went to these call centers, they found that employees in these call centers were suffering from several physical and mental ailments due to poor working conditions. However, they refused to confront the management or form a union. When they were asked why they did not want to fight for their rights, despite the fact that they were suffering, they said, "We are professionals, and professionals do not act that way." They had defined themselves as professionals. The management and the HR people had successfully convinced them that being professionals, they should behave in a particular manner and not against the management. Social identity can even inspire people to give great personal sacrifices for the group. On the night of November 26, 2008, the general manager of the Taj lost his family to terrorists. But he continued to stay back until all the guests were safe. When he was asked later by a journalist about the source of his courage, he narrated a conversation with his father when his father had told him to be a brave Sikh and that he was an army general's son. His identity as the son of an army general or a brave Sikh or the captain of the ship made him, gave him courage in that particular time. So we've already seen how social identities can motivate behavior. Now let us see what leaders do to change other people's identities. This is a screenshot from Yash Raj Films 2007 movie Chak De, where Kabir Khan, the coach of the Indian women hockey team, asked each of the players to come and introduce themselves. Initially, each of the girls come and introduces herself by identifying her state of origin. Kabir Khan refuses to acknowledge this and throws each one of them out of the team. Finally, one of the girls introduces herself as being from India, and Kabir Khan accepts her as the team member. The rest of the girls get the message and they all introduce themselves as being members of Team India. So, what happens over here is that in the mind of the individual, there are several identities which are playing. In this case, we have put several identities which may be in the mind of this individual. These identities are arranged in the form of a hierarchy. And if the member of the Indian team hierarchy is not uppermost in the mind of this hockey player, chances that she will act as desired by the team manager is unlikely. So the task of the leader is to move that identity, which is otherwise suppressed, to the forefront and get it and make it salient for the hockey player to play as if she's in one team. Leaders tell us what to do by telling us who we are. When people say that I'm looking for my purpose in life, the question that they are actually asking is, who am I and why am I here? Our perceptions of who am I and why am I here drive our understanding of what projects we should pursue. The task of the leader is to define this, who am I, for the follower, and then the projects, that is what to do, becomes quite clear for the follower. This clear understanding of who am I and why am I here is what provides a sense of purpose and meaning to employees at work. And this is the missing link that people need to provide in an organizational context. Let us take an example from a real business situation. This is a speech that Anand Mahindra has made to the employees in his spare parts business, when he says over here that what you sell to the customer is not spare parts, you sell the customer peace of mind, you sell them trust, you sell the gift of time. It is you who are the face of Mahindra and you are the helping hand of Mahindra for the customer. When he makes these statements, he is actually defining for the people in that team who they are. And having defined who they are, what they need to do becomes quite clear to them. Now, providing a sense of purpose may not always make people want to take the decisions that they need to take. We know several instances of people inspiring other human beings to do things which are not in their interest or in the interest of other groups. So here we have tried to put across some contrasts. On the left hand side, you have a situation where a political leader persuades a group of people to terrorize members of other groups. And on the right hand side, you have a political leader who persuades a group of people to peacefully fight for their rights. Similarly, you could have a business leader who persuades people to do things unethically. And you could have a business leader who persuades his team to do things ethically. You could have a factory manager who persuades the team to maximize production despite environmental and safety standards. And you could have an ethical factory manager who persuades the team to maximize production while ensuring safety compliance. Similarly, you could have a sports captain who inspires hatred for the opponents and persuades to go to any extent, even to do unethical things to win the game. Or you may have a sports captain who persuades the team to defeat their opponents while upholding the rules of the game in letter and spirit. So we see these two distinctions. On one side, we have individuals who are persuading their team members to do things which are not going to make them better human beings. And on the other side, you have people persuading their team members to become better human beings. So we have a term for this. On the left hand side, we call it pseudo leadership. And on the right hand side, we call it as authentic leadership. The idea is that in one of the both cases, the people want to take the actions that the leader is telling them to take. They are acting willingly. They are not under any compulsion. But if you look at the examples on the left hand side, they are not going to be better off. Neither are the groups around them going to be better off as a result of their actions. On the other hand, if you look at the right hand side, you will find that not only are they going to be better off, but they are not likely to be harming any other group outside their circle. Now let us go back to the Chak De example and what it would look like in the Chak De example. Let us say the coach of Chak De, Kabir Khan, inspires the team members to take action, become one team. Now this will surely make them work together as a team, bring a lot of solidarity between them. But is there any guarantee that this will not make them work against their other, do anything unethical against the other team, or treat the other team with respect that they deserve. So, mobilizing the Team India spirit will definitely provide the motive power for the group to work together against the common adversary. But in addition to this, the Kabir Khan has to activate two other identities. One is the sports person identity, so that they play within the rules of hockey, and the human identity, so that they recognize that they may be hockey players, they may be playing for India, but at the end of the day, they are human beings. Now, the identity of being a sports person and a human being is what provides the moral boundary to the energy unleashed by the team identity. And that creates a zone of moral development. The team has to work, and the team has to work to defeat the other team. But their actions will be bounded by the rules of hockey and the rules of basic human decency, which their sports person identity and their human identity makes them fall under. The pseudo leaders would be those who would only tap into the narrow group identities without highlighting the common universal identity. Hence, they brainwash people and unleash their energy against groups in unethical and immoral ways. I think recognizing these multiple identities working in tandem is what makes the big difference between a pseudo leader and a moral leader or an authentic leader. A good example of this is PV Sindhu. There are several examples of her showing great graciousness, even with her opponents, even after she has defeated them. Here are two examples in the 2016 and 2020 Olympics, where she is showing great solidarity with a opponent on the court. But once she is out of the court, she is just a human being and good friends with each one of them. We also have this particular idea in the Indian Army. I'll give you two stories over here which will illustrate what we mean by this. A good army has the identity of the nation and fights for the country, but they also have the identity of being a professional soldier and the ethics that go with that, and they're also trained to be good human beings. In 1945, Rangoon fell to the British, and at that time, they captured a few soldiers who were fighting for Subhash Chandra Bose's Indian National Army. When the soldiers from the Indian National Army were captured, at that time in 1946, Field Marshal Cariappa, who at that time was a brigadier in the British Indian Army, had to preside over the court martial of a former colleague who was Lieutenant Burhanuddin. Now, Burhanuddin was a soldier in the Indian National Army, and as far as the law at that time was concerned, he had committed treason. So then Brigadier Cariappa presided over his court martial and gave him the penalty of prison, which was to be given as per his professional duty. Immediately after the court martial, he got up and shook hands with Burhanuddin. This incident created a huge storm, and the adjutant general pulled up Brigadier Karepa and asked him why he did this. And he said, I sentenced him as a president of the court, but I shook hands with him as a gentleman. Another example of this is the way Field Marshal Manekshaw treated the people, the prisoners of war, in the 1971 surrender of the Pakistani troops. It is said that he went and talked to them, tried to look after their welfare, and tried to ensure that they were comfortable. And several of them remained indebted to him even after they left back to their homes. Now, when we look at these identities, we find that it is the narrow, we can move from very narrow identities like an individual identity to a family identity, and we can keep moving to broader and broader identities. What is the difference between the narrow identity and the broad identity? If you think back, you will see that the narrow identities are those that energize you and help you in goal directed efforts. When you focus on your narrow identity, you can be competitive, you can focus on your survival, your success, and that gives you a certain kind of energy to fight. But the broad identity is what gives you a basis for moral action. It is the broad identity which tells you what are the limits of your action as to when you can stop, because you recognize your similarity, your oneness, your commonality with other members of other groups who may not share the narrow identity that has motivated you to action. Here is a good example from Martin Luther King. The challenge for leadership is to try to use a combination of these narrow and broad identities simultaneously so as to ensure that the best self of the follower comes to the forefront. Now, in the first part of Martin Luther King's classic speech, which he gave in 1963 to a huge crowd of 250,000 people, he starts off by talking about all the problems that the African American people have been facing. 100 years have passed since the slavery has been abolished in the United States. But even after those 100 years, he focuses on the fact that the African American people are still not free. He talks about them being crippled by the manacles of segregation, the chains of discrimination. He talks about the fact that they were not allowed to go to hotels and restaurants and inns on the road, and they were not allowed to go to the same schools, etc. So he spends the first part of his speech highlighting the African American black identity, telling them how bad their condition is. This is important to mobilize people so that they can fight for what is justifiably theirs. If he would have stopped at this point, then we would not be talking about Martin Luther King today. Martin Luther King's greatness lies that after he has made them focus on their narrow identity and the problems that they are facing, he also then makes them focus on their larger American identity and their larger human identity. He says, in the process of gaining our rightful place, we must not be guilty of wrongful deeds. He says we must not satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred. He also says that our destinies are tied up. The destiny of the African American people is tied up with the destiny of the white American people. And then finally, he invokes freedom, not just for black and white people in America, for all human beings. So you see over here that Martin Luther King does not just focus on the narrow identity of the African American people and their struggles, but focuses also on the broader American identity as well as the larger human identity which connects them all. Having done this, it is easy then for the followers to recognize, because these three identities form the boundary within which their actions can be enacted. So, to summarize all that we have said in today's session, we started off with the first question: what is leadership? And we said leadership is a process of social change in which an individual influences others to willingly work towards a joint purpose, which transforms the individual and the group for the better. Then, how do we motivate followers to work for the common good? For this, we said that leaders need to define and reinforce social identities. Leaders tell us what we ought to do by defining who we are. Organizational leaders should create these identities for people so that they can feel part of a larger collective and act according to the good of that larger collective. However, while doing that, leaders must be careful not just to focus on the narrow identities, but simultaneously hire, engage the broader identities as well. And simultaneously engaging narrow and broad identities is what enables them to manifest the fullest potential of the team members. The narrow identities enable the coordination and to complete the interdependent task for the good of the group. And it is the broad identities which will ensure that there is concern for outgroups and ethical actions. Those of you who are interested in knowing more about this, these are some books which you may find interesting, which can help you to delve into this topic deeper. Thank you for your patient listening.
Uh, Thank you, sir, for such great insights.